That night felt like the end. Not because of the hour or the tense silence in the hallways, but because something inside Susan no longer knew what to hope for. She was sitting on the cold hospital floor, phone in hand, her gaze lost, and her soul in pieces. Her son, a 16-year-old boy, was fighting a severe form of leukemia. The doctors had been clear in the latest report. Now it's up to time. But time doesn't wait when someone you love is caught between life and death. And there, between the beeping machines and the hurried footsteps of night shift staff, Susan couldn't find the strength to pray. She had never been religious. She had faith, yes, the kind that whispers in silence, made of desperation and hope, the kind that lives in those who have tried everything. But that night, as if something deeper was guiding her, she opened her phone's browser and typed, almost without thinking, a word that brings peace. The first result was a simple video, low resolution with a shaky voice. The thumbnail read only, "There's a psalm that changes everything." She hesitated, but clicked. The video began with a story much like hers. A mother, a hospital, and a pain too big to carry. And something inside Susan broke. The tears came before any words. It was as if she wasn't watching the video. She was feeling it. The promise was that hidden somewhere in Scripture there was a psalm forgotten by many, but for those who found it, it could become a balm in the middle of despair. Susan didn't know how to pray. She wasn't even sure if she believed any of it. But she couldn't stop listening, as if the video was calling her pain by name. That's when she remembered the hospital chapel, a tiny room at the end of the hallway, between the pediatric unit and imaging. She had never been inside, didn't even know if it was open, but led by something she didn't understand, she walked slowly to the wooden door, pushed it gently, and stepped in. The space was empty. No music, no candles, no one. Just a Bible opened to a random page, and the muffled sound of machines in the distance. Susan knelt on the floor. She didn't say a word. She just cried. She cried as if pouring out months of pain in a single breath, and in that moment she felt something, as if someone had gently touched her shoulder. But no one was there. It was as if heaven itself, in silence, had decided to sit beside her. And in that moment, Susan didn't need answers. She just needed presence. What if what you need most right now isn't an answer, but an invisible embrace? A gentle whisper from heaven saying, "You are not alone. Someone still hears you." If you feel that right now, write your name or the name of someone you carry in your heart in the comments. Share your story, your pain, your silent faith. Let's build a living chain of hope, where each name becomes a prayer, every comment, a seed, and each word, a breath from God to calm stormy souls. The next morning, Susan still felt the trace of that silent presence. It was as if something, formless as it was, had remained with her. There was no change in the medical report, no clinical sign of improvement. Her son remained sedated, his body fragile, his skin pale, his veins marked by needles and IVs. But somehow Susan was breathing differently. She walked through the hospital with the same exhaustion in her eyes, but with a new kind of silence inside. A pause between pain and hope, subtle, but real. That peace that touched her shoulder in the chapel seemed to linger in some corner of her soul, hidden yet present. In the days that followed, she kept her vigil routine. She slept on plastic chairs with her coat folded as a pillow, always holding her phone. She alternated between medical updates and random videos on faith and prayer. She wasn't looking for a formula. She was searching for relief, something to make the suffering feel less lonely. One night, after another round of painful tests, she returned to the chapel. This time she brought a cup of coffee and a thin pillow. She was ready to spend the night there. When she sat on the floor again, her body collapsed into an exhaustion more emotional than physical, and then she cried again. But this time, it wasn't just pain. It was longing. It was weariness. It was a wordless lament that only heaven understands. That's when she felt it again. Not a voice, not a vision, but warmth in her chest, like someone inside her whispering, "I know." She closed her eyes and tried to remember the last time she felt peace. She couldn't. She could only recall medical reports, serious looks, painful words. She remembered diagnosis day, the tears in the elevator, the questions with no answers echoing in her pillow. But now, here, there was silence. A silence that held her. That didn't demand faith or explanations. That simply said, "You can cry. I'm here." When she returned to the room that morning, something in Susan had shifted. She looked at her son and smiled. A small smile, a painful one, but real. For the first time in weeks, she didn't need to understand why this was happening. She just wanted to be present. She just wanted him to feel that as long as she was there, he wouldn't be alone. She gently touched his cold hand and said, "Mom's here. I'll stay." That afternoon, a young nurse quietly approached and said, "You've been spending a lot of time in the chapel, haven't you? I think it's beautiful." Susan smiled, unsure of what to say. She didn't want to sound mystical. And honestly, she couldn't explain something she didn't fully understand herself. So she simply replied, "Sometimes, silence speaks louder than words." The nurse nodded, her eyes glistening, and gently left a small cup of coffee on the table, a simple gesture of care. Susan thanked her with a look, and in that look, there was something the nurse never forgot, the sense that God was visiting someone. In silence. That night, Susan couldn't sleep. Not because of the hums and beeps of the ICU, but because of something that kept echoing in her mind. What if that presence she had felt wasn't just comfort? What if it was a calling? A subtle invitation to search for something still undiscovered? A verse, a word, a psalm. As if somewhere, hidden among the sacred pages, there was a secret waiting to be found. What if the piece she touched was just the beginning of what God wanted to reveal? Because sometimes, when everything feels dark, that's exactly when God's hand begins to write His invisible answer. The next afternoon, while her son underwent yet another round of exams, Susan sat alone in the waiting room. She was exhausted. The TV in the corner ran news she wasn't watching. The coffee from the vending machine tasted more bitter than usual. She grabbed her phone and typed almost instinctively, "Prayer for a mother with a sick child." The screen flooded with videos, devotionals, sermons. She scrolled aimlessly until a simple video with a dark thumbnail and just a few likes caught her eye. The title read, "This prayer saved me on the night I couldn't take it anymore." Something about it pierced through her exhaustion. She clicked. The video wasn't polished. The voiceover was low and unsteady, but there was truth in the words. The narrator shared how one night, when everything felt lost, they had found peace in a specific passage of the Bible, a psalm. But the video didn't reveal which one. Instead, the voice encouraged listeners to stay until the end. Susan watched all the way through, and at the end, the narrator said only this, "You'll know which one it is, because it will find you." She furrowed her brow. It sounded vague, and yet, something in her couldn't shake that line. Scrolling through the comments, something even more curious appeared. One comment with hundreds of likes read, "I was at my breaking point. I had just lost my son. I found this video by chance, and it was the psalm that finally helped me sleep in peace for the first time in months." Susan read it over and over, but the commenter never said which psalm, only this, "It found me when I needed it most. If you're reading this, it will find you too." Susan closed her eyes. Part of her wanted to believe. Another part, the one wounded by reality, remained skeptical. How could something she hadn't even seen yet find her? But that comment clung to her thoughts like an echo. She returned to the video, scrolling through more comments, hoping for a hint, a reference, a number, nothing, just stories, and each one more powerful than the last. That night, Lying in the recliner next to her son's bed, Susan couldn't sleep. She kept repeating the phrase, "It will find you." But how? Where? She opened her Bible app and typed in, "peace." Dozens of psalms came up. She read several. They were beautiful, but none felt like the one. None brought back the sensation she had felt in the chapel. It was like looking for a familiar face in a crowd. Everything felt close, but not quite right. In the middle of the night, she got up to grab some water. In the hallway, she saw an elderly man sitting alone, murmuring something. He held a worn Bible in his hands. Susan didn't want to intrude, but something pulled her toward him. As she approached, she realized he was quietly reciting a psalm, one she'd never heard before. The words floated through the air like a lullaby, soft, gentle, almost like a spiritual cradle. She waited for him to finish, then gently asked, "Sir, would you mind repeating what you just read?" The man smiled kindly and showed her the passage. She typed the words into her phone. There it was, a short psalm, rarely quoted, mostly forgotten, but it felt like it had been written for her. It wasn't yet time to understand everything, but Susan felt it deep inside. That encounter wasn't random. Something was leading her, step by step, toward this moment of revelation. And what if that psalm, buried among so many pages, was the key she had been searching for all along? Because some answers don't come through sermons, but through forgotten comments. And sometimes the answer you're looking for isn't at the top of the page, but whispered between the lines of someone else's pain. That night felt like the end, not because of the hour or the tense silence of the hallways, but because something in Susan no longer knew what to expect. She sat on the cold hospital floor, phone in hand, eyes lost, soul in pieces. Her son, only 16, was battling aggressive leukemia. The doctors had been clear in the latest update. Now it's up to time. But time doesn't wait when someone you love is suspended between life and death. And there, among beeping machines and nurses rushing by, Susan couldn't find the strength to pray. She was never religious. Yes, she had faith, the kind that's whispered, built from desperation and fragile hope, the kind that lives in the silence of those who have tried everything. But that night, driven by something deeper, she opened her phone browser and typed, almost without thinking, a word. That brings peace. The first result was a low-quality video with shaky audio. The thumbnail simply read, "There is a psalm that changes everything." She hesitated, then clicked. The video opened with a story eerily similar to hers. A mother, a hospital, a pain, too heavy for the chest to hold. And something inside Susan cracked. Tears fell before a single word was even spoken. It wasn't just a video she was watching. It was something she was feeling. The narrator spoke of a hidden psalm, one long, forgotten by many, that could become a balm in the middle of despair. Susan didn't know how to pray. She wasn't even sure she believed any of it. But she couldn't stop listening, as if the video itself was calling her name through her pain. That's when she remembered the hospital chapel, a small room at the end of the hallway, tucked between pediatrics and imaging. She had never stepped inside, didn't even know if it stayed open at night. But led by something she couldn't explain, she walked slowly to the wooden door, pushed it open gently, and entered. The place was empty, no music, no candles, no one. Just an open Bible on a random page and the faint sound of machines humming in the distance. Susan knelt down. She didn't speak. She just wept. Wept like someone pouring months of pain into one moment. And then she felt it, as if someone had placed a hand on her shoulder. But there was no one there. It was as if heaven itself had quietly chosen to sit beside her. In that moment, Susan didn't need answers. She needed presence. And what if what you need most right now isn't an answer, but an invisible embrace? A quiet whisper from heaven saying, "You are not alone. Someone is still listening." If you feel that now, write your name or the name of someone you carry in your heart in the comments. Share your story, your silent faith, your pain. Let's build a living chain of hope, where every name becomes a prayer, every comment a seed, and every word a breath from God calming a soul in storm. The next morning, Susan still felt the trace of that silent presence. Something, even without shape, had stayed with her. There was no change in the medical report, no clinical signs of improvement. Her son remained sedated, fragile body, pale skin, veins marked with needles and IV tubes. But somehow, Susan was breathing differently. She still walked the hospital halls with tired eyes, but something new was settling inside. A pause between the pain and hope. Subtle, but real. That peace from the chapel seemed tucked somewhere in her soul now, hidden but present. In the following days, she kept her vigil routine, sleeping in plastic chairs with a jacket folded as a pillow, always holding her phone. She switched between medical updates and random videos about faith and prayer. She wasn't searching for a formula. She was searching for relief. Something to make the suffering feel less lonely. One early morning, after another tough round of tests, she returned to the chapel. This time she brought coffee and a thin pillow. She planned to spend the night there. When she sat on the floor again, her body collapsed more from emotional exhaustion than physical fatigue. And once more she cried. But this time, it wasn't just pain. It was grief, weariness, a lament too deep for words, the kind only heaven can understand. And then, it happened again. Not a voice, not a vision, but a warmth in her chest, as if something whispered from within. I know. She closed her eyes and tried to remember the last time she felt peace. She couldn't. Only memories of lab results, solemn glances, and hard words echoed in her mind. She remembered diagnosis day, crying silently in the elevator, the questions that haunted her pillow. But now, in that moment, there was silence. A silence that embraced, that didn't demand faith or explanations. It simply said, "You can cry. I'm here." When she returned to her son's room that morning, something in Susan had shifted. She looked at him and smiled. A small smile, painful, but real. For the first time in weeks, she didn't need to understand the purpose behind it all. She just wanted to be present. She wanted him to feel that as long as she was there, he wasn't alone. She gently touched his cold hand and whispered, "Mommy's here. I'll keep going." That night, she didn't ask for healing. She didn't demand answers. She just read, "I have calmed and quieted my soul, like a weaned child with its mother. Like a weaned child is my soul within me." And after that, she simply remained, sitting, in peace. For the first time in weeks, she didn't feel the need to check the monitors every minute or run down the hall looking for a doctor. For the first time, she trusted, and without realizing it, she fell asleep right there, her head resting on the side of the bed, holding her son's hand. What she didn't know was that her son also slept soundly that night. A peaceful sleep. No restlessness, no high fevers, no waking in pain. The night shift nurse even whispered, "He seems like a different boy tonight. He's breathing better." By morning, Susan woke with puffy eyes, but a lighter heart. It was as if that psalm had opened a window where new air flowed in. When she looked at her son, she noticed his cheeks were less pale, his hands less cold, and though he still wasn't conscious, there was something there. Small, but powerful, a presence no machine could measure. She quietly stepped out of the room and went to the hospital's small makeshift chapel, a tiny room with only a few benches and a simple cross on the wall. She sat down and just stayed there. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. She just wanted to give thanks. And there, alone, she whispered the most honest prayer of her life. No fancy words, no formulas, just, "If we must keep going, let it be with peace. If it's time to let go, let it be with the certainty that I was never alone." When she returned to the room, she found a small envelope on her chair. Inside, a handwritten note read, "Psalm 131 embraced me too. Thank you for sharing." Susan didn't know who had left it, but it made her smile with tears in her eyes. What started as a quiet cry for peace was now spreading, without noise, without announcements, like a gentle fragrance that slowly shifts the air in an entire place. In the days that followed, other parents began visiting the chapel. No one talked much, but everyone stayed in silence. It was as if that tiny room had become the only place in the hospital where time slowed down, where the world's noise couldn't enter, where every breath carried hope. One doctor once stepped in just to leave a piece of paper with a single sentence: "Thank you for the peace I found here." Even the cleaning staff began leaving notes. No one really knew what was happening. They just felt it. And you? What if the peace you've been looking for isn't outside, but waiting to be read aloud within you? Over the next days, Susan began writing Psalm 131 by hand on small pieces of paper and quietly leaving them at the hospital's front desk. Some vanished in minutes. Others stayed for hours. No one asked where they came from. They just picked them up, folded them, and tucked them away. It was as if those sheets held something invisible, a reply, a comfort, a hand reaching out. One day, a mother from another room walked up to Susan. She didn't share her name or her story. She just asked, "Would you read with me tonight?" And side by side, sitting on the cold corridor floor, they recited the words that had become part of their souls. Other mothers joined. Some just lingered nearby. Some reached out their hands. And before long, Susan had unknowingly started a quiet group. No rules, no obligations. Just broken hearts sharing silence, and in that silence, finding relief. Susan's son began responding to treatment. Tiny steps, a sign here, a little progress there. And with every medical update that brought hope, Susan would write another copy of the psalm. "Maybe someone else needs this more than I do right now," she would say. One morning, she walked into the chapel with a blank sheet of paper. She sat, took a deep breath, and began to write a letter. "Today, I felt God hug me, not with words but with presence, not with promises but with peace. Maybe my son will recover. Maybe he won't. But whatever happens, I know he was here. And that changes everything." She taped the letter to the chapel wall with a small piece of adhesive. Beside it, she pinned another copy of Psalm 131. The words no longer felt like an ancient text. They had become the soundtrack of dozens of aching souls. And the most beautiful part? No one shouted, no one explained. They just felt it. And now, I invite you to close your eyes for a moment. It doesn't matter where you are. Breathe deeply and join me in this prayer. Lord, calm the heart that made it this far. May this soul, weary from so many battles, find rest in your arms. Like a child in its mother's embrace, serene, protected, unafraid. May this soul feel held. Transform anguish into surrender, pain into presence, waiting into trust. And even in silence, let the heart that hears this prayer know, the Lord is here. Now I ask you, write in the comments the name of the one you carry in your heart. It might be you. It might be someone you love. Share this story, your prayer, your pain. Let's build together a living chain of intercession, where every name is a lit candle, every word a breath of healing, and every comment an angel knocking on the door of a miracle, because sometimes all a soul really needs is the hand of God, reaching into the dark where no one else can go.